Right. Good Shabbos, everybody. Good Shabbos, Warren. Good Shabbos, Carl. Good Shabbos, Jack. Very important first question. I know you're all muted, but just give me the thumbs up or thumbs down. Can you hear me clearly? Because I have an AC working right next to. Oh, thank God. Is that Carl? Can you and Janet hear okay? Also, you have no idea what that means to me. This my office is a current 84 degrees. So without this thing going, I think I might turn into a puddle by the end of it. But it's it. Warren, it's great to see you, buddy. You get to see with my own eyes, and I, I'll keep sending you the video, so don't worry about a thing. And again, good Shabbos to Jack, good Shabbos to our friends who are watching on the stream. I sort of joked a few times over the years that, there is a certain odd nostalgia for Zoom services like this, right? It's, you'd think, but it's there's a lot of people who I don't necessarily get to see as often in this kind of way. And once we run the service on a Friday night, it's usually set it and forget it. So I don't get to see everybody on the Zoom. So I'm glad to be back in this format. And as you'll see, I'm by myself. Kate Lauren has the weekend off, and then next weekend sadly is our last official weekend with us. Although, as I said, something tells me it won't be the last time that we will see Lauren. But in any case, it's old school style where you got me. I'm here in all my glory. Bonnie, great to see you. Give Ira my love. And again, we hope, if you're watching at home, watching on YouTube, watching in some form or the other, that you'll be a part of our service with us tonight. And as always, we're going to get started with our blessings for the Shabbat candles. I've got mine right behind me. You're welcome to join with if you have your own. Either way, we're on page 120 in our prayer books. And again, for those of you that are on the Zoom, if at any point the audio starts to sound like you're hearing the AC in the background, just wave me off, send me a chat, something like that, and I'll turn it off. It'll be fine. I lived in Israel for a year. I can handle some amount of humidity. It's fine. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. So we'll turn now to page 130 as we begin Kabbalat Shabbat together with L'chun Ranana at the very top of the page. L'chun Ranana, L'chun Ranana, L'chun Ranana l'Adonai. L'chun Ranana, L'chun Ranana, L'chun Ranana l'Adonai. Naria, Naria, Letzor Yishenu. Bizmirot Naria lo. Naria, Naria, Letzor Yishenu. Bizmirot Naria lo. L'chun Ranana, L'chun Ranana, L'chun Ranana l'Adonai. L'chun Ranana, L'chun Ranana, L'chun Ranana l'Adonai. We're now on page 131, the 96th Psalm, Shiru L'Adonai. Shiru L'Adonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru L'Adonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru L'Adonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato, Shiru L'Adonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato, Shiru L'Adonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru L'Adonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru L'Adonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato, Shiru L'Adonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. We're now on page 132, Or Zarua, which is the last Hebrew paragraph at the bottom of the page. Or Zarua la tzadik, Ule Yishrei lev simcha. Or zaru ala tzadik ulehishrei lev simecha. Simechu tzadikim b'Adonai vehodu lezecher kodsho. Simechu tzadikim b'Adonai vehodu lezecher kodsho. We'll turn now to page 134, Zamru Ladonai, beginning at the top of the page. Zamru Ladonai bechinor, bechinor bekol zimram, b'chatzotzrot bekol shofar, ahariu lifnei hamelech Adonai, yiram hayamun lo, tevehel veyoshvei bam, neharot imcha uchaf yachad, harim yiranenu, lifnei Adonai kiva, lishpot haaretz, yishpot tevehel betzedek, ve'amim be'mesharim, yiram hayamum lo, tevehel ve'yoshvei bam, neharot imcha uchaf yachad, harim yiranenu. We're now on page 135, Romemu, which is the last Hebrew paragraph in the middle of the page. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehakodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehakodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehar kodsho. We'll turn now to page 138 for Lachado D. A reminder, we'll do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs. And for the last paragraph, if you're inclined to stand, you're more than welcome to. But we were just at the beach, and when I told our youngest, the 3-year-old that was there, Alexandra, I said, we could just bow. Okay, you can bow in whatever direction you may choose, even if you don't feel like standing up. The idea is to show the kind of love and reverence to Shabbat as if you were welcoming a person. So again, Lachado D, top of page 138, first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs. Lechado di likrat kala penei Shabbat mekabela. Lechado di likrat kala penei Shabbat mekabela. Lechado di likrat kala. Penei Shabbat mekabela, lechado di likrat kala. Penei Shabbat mekabela, shamor bezachor bedibur echad. Ishmianu el hamiuchad, Adonai echad, u'shemo echad, l'shem u'tiferet v'litilav. Lechado di likrat kala, penei Shabbat mekabela. Lechado di likrat kala, penei Shabbat mekabela. Likrat Shabbat lefu b'nelchav. Hi mekor haberacha merosh mikedem nesucha sof maaseh b'machshava tchila. Lechado di dodi likrat kalam. B'nei Shabbat nekabelam. Lecha dodi likrat kalam. B'nei Shabbat nekabelam. Fifth paragraph. Hitoreri. Iva orech umiuri, uri, shir daberi, kevod Adonai Allahayich nigla. Lecha dodim likrat kalam, B'nei Shabbat nekabelam. Lecha dodi likrat kalam, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Ninth paragraph. Bohi b'shalom ateret malam, Gam b'simcha u'b'tzolam, Toch emunei am segula, Bohi chala, Lecha dodi likrat kalam, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kalam, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. We'll turn now to page 140, Tzadik Katamar, which is the Hebrew that just indents in the middle of the page. Tzadik Katamar Yifra Keres Baban Shetunim Beveit Adonai Bechatzrot Eloheinu Yafritu On Yenubun Beseba Teshenim Verananim Ihu Lehagil Ki Ashar Adonai Suri Velo Hablatabo. Something just flew into my mouth. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to get some water. I hope whatever it was kosher. That's very good. Thanks for bearing with me, everybody. So we're going to turn now, lost my place a little bit here, to our Chatzi Kaddish on page 144, and page 144. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabam, ve'almad yivrach yirtei ve'amlich malchutei, v'chayechon u'vyomechon, u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, Bagala, ubizman kariv eimeru, amen. Yeshme Rabba mevarach, le'alam li'almei almayam, yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yifar v'yidramam, v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalam, shemei dekudesha b'richu, Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damihiran me'alma, ve'imeru, amen. We turn now to page 146 for the Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai Amborach Leolam Va'ed. We're now on the bottom of page 149. We'll read together in English. This is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Umavir yomu mevi laila, umavil beyomu velaila, Adonai tzvahot shemo, El chai v'kayam, tamidim lo chaleinu leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Amahari v'arabim. We're now on page 150. We'll read together in English at the bottom of the page. Everlasting love, you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We'll rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. Ki ehem chayenu ve'orech yameinu v'hem nege yomam v'lahaila v'avatcha tasir mimenu li'olamim Baruch atah Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Please join me on page 154. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'elem asher anochi metzavcha hayom al levavecha v'shinatam lebanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha v'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'derech u'shokbecha u'kumecha u'kshartam leot hayadecha v'hayu letotafot b'ninecha u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'visharecha leman tiskeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'yitem kedoshim le'elohechem ani Adonai Elohechem Asher hotzeiti etchem mi'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem Adonai Elohechem emet. We'll turn now to page 157. We'll read together in English at the top of the page. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. As we turn to page 158, Michama. Ya bye bye bim 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 bam, ya bye bye bim bam, ya bye bim 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 bam, ya bye bim bam, ya bye bye, ya bye bim bam, ya bye ya bye bim bam. Mi chamocha bailim Adonai, mi chamocha edar bakodesh, nor atilot. No sefelle, nor atilo, no sefelle. Ya bye bim 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 bam, ya bye bim bam, ya bye bim 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 bam, ya bye bim bam, ya bye ya bye bim bam, ya bye ya bye bim bam. Malchutecha ra'u panecha bokeam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam ze'eli anu ve'amru Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed v'nemar ki pada Adonai et Yaakov u'volo miyad chazak mimenu Baruch atah Adonai gal Yisrael. Let there be love and understanding among us, That peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up, waiting to do your will. Hashkivenu, page 160. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu lechayim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu lechayim. Ushmor tzeiteinu uvoeinu lechaim ushalom me'ata ve'ad olam. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Yerushalayim. Turn to page 162 at the very top. V'sham. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית עולם. עין ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי Shabbat vayinapash. In a moment, we'll begin the silent Amidah as we always do together, and then we will continue silently from there. At that point, I'll turn my screen off, everybody to use this time in the way that is most meaningful to you. And we'll take probably 4 or 5 minutes to give the space for everyone to pray in their own pace. But as always, if you're finished, early, look around this wonderful prayer book that we shared. There's a lot of great stuff in here. Pick something that you haven't looked at before, or if you just want to spend these few minutes in meditation, that is just fine as well. But as always, we like to begin together even before we continue in silence. Again, page 164. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Hey, if anybody is still davening their Amidah, please continue at your own pace. You can always catch up. For those that are finished, we'll conclude together with Oseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom bimroma, Uyaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. We'll turn now in our Sidurim and our prayer books to page 371 to offer our Misha Berach for this evening. Before we sing together, just to think in our community, we're really extending our hearts and our minds this week to Aaron Zweig, Michael Klinghoffer, Norma Paulsak, Amy Cass, Steve Levine, Rivka Bat Rachel, Gail Gambino, Leah Bat Naomi, Gedalia Ben Sylvia, Lorraine Danis, David Dowling, Sivia Devorah Bat Francis, Deborah Block Kroll, Sylvia Orn, Michelle Sawicki, Francis Kirschman, Paul Eric Fuden Bat Esther, Shelley Newmark, Diane Axelrod, Gabriella Rose Spicer, Dina Bathana, Moshe Ben Ephraim Fischel, Sydney Ross, Eve Rose, Michael Ben Chananya, David Kyle Klopman, Bensi Tepper, Samuel Moskowitz, Livora Batsima, Moshe Eliezer Ben Yakutiel, Judy Yang, Maxine Eisenstadt, Lorraine Davis, Jeffrey Miller, Brad Friedman, Paul Greenfield, Hannah Bat Miriam, Sandy Greenwald, Pat Shionis, Peter Parcher, Jeannie Levinson, Eva Levinson, Leah and Pam, Harlan Spitz, Jody Bernstein, and Matthew Agarwal. And of course, we invite those that are on the Zoom. If you have additional names to share, you can share them in the chat. You can simply say them in your heart. And for those, of course, watching on the stream, you're welcome to do so as well. We'll all join together on page 371 in the middle of the page as we sing our Misha Berach. Misha Berach Avotenu Mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach imotenu. Mekor habracha avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shleima, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. My Mets keep, I almost fell off there, but they actually won a Subway Series for once, so I figured I would wear it proudly in some form or the other. I think this is very cool. One of our B'nai Mitzvah students had Mets kippot and Yankees kippot made, which was great. Made bring good luck. So tonight, since we're on Zoom, I thought this is a good night to take advantage of the fact that I can actually show you guys some things which I really want to. And I'm thinking my mind is already skipping ahead a couple of weeks. I'm very, very excited. We have a Shabbaton coming up in 2 weeks from now, in which we are welcoming back the president of HUC, Dr. Andrew Rayfeld, and Rabbi Cantor Shani Ben Or, also being welcomed back, who's coming to us all the way from Yerushalayim, from the Holy City, from Israel, and bringing a rather unique skill set for a really amazing Shabbat. And really all this is coming together because of our connection as a community to the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. Now, you hear me talk about HUC-JR often. It's because it means something, it means a great deal to me. By the end of my sermon tonight, I'll touch on a few of those things, but it occurred to me that over the years, that one of the struggles actually of rabbinical seminaries is oftentimes congregations don't really understand or know who they are, where they came from, where their mark is on the history of American Judaism, and ultimately how the institutions that train the rabbis, cantors, educators, professional development, fundraisers, development officers of the Reform movement, where they come from. I promise we are not grown in a field somewhere. We are trained, and we are trained at the highest possible caliber. But really, to understand that, you have to understand the history, and the history is actually really quite fascinating. So, as I said, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we have some technology with us tonight, and I'm going to give you, in a second, hopefully you can all see this comfortably. Yes? You can see the screen? Good. A very brief, I promise, a very brief history of the Hebrew Union College, hyphen Jewish Institute of Religion. And I'll explain what that hyphen is about. Some of you may know some of these things, but I have a strong suspicion that we won't end the sermon without everybody learning at least one new thing. And most importantly, to get us excited for a couple of weeks from now when we're going to learn together. So let's go back to the beginning. And this wonderful man here, Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise. Just out of curiosity for those on the Zoom, hands. How many of you have heard of Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise? Okay, good. We got a couple. Say a chetzi chetzi, as we say in Hebrew, about half and half. Okay, very good. So Isaac Mayer Wise is one of the most significant figures in American Jewish history for a number of reasons. He ultimately is born in an area which at the time was not known as the Czech Republic, but is part of the Czech Republic as of today. And he comes to the United States in 1846. Now let's remember again our history in this country. Somewhat tumultuous part of our history, to say the very least, okay? And he's actually in advance of the massive migration of Eastern European Jews that come much later, right? In the 1880s, 1890s, in the early 1900s, the founders of our synagogue don't come really until that time period. So he is here much earlier on, and he is trained, he is an intellectual, and he is very quickly someone who looks at the United States of America in its early days, even in its tumultuous days, and sees something that he's never really seen before. A land of promise, a land of possibility, and a land that needs to be acknowledged for the uniqueness of what it is. So one of the first things that he looks around and sees that as a real problem, as he sees it for American Judaism, is there really aren't any American Jewish rabbis. There aren't any American rabbis. Almost every rabbi at that point in history in this country is a rabbi who came over from, generally speaking, at this point in time, largely from Germany or from the Austro-Hungarian Empire to a larger degree, some from the Pale of Settlement, but the vast majority of them coming from Germany. And as a result of it, doing actually what was very common for a lot of religions that came to the United States, speaking in the lingua franca of where they came from. That meant that services were being run in German. Conversations were being run in German. Preaching was being done in German. And he looked around at the landscape and said, how can this be? Here we have this amazing country coming into its own, built upon a premise of a sort of unique identity amongst the nations. We need something else here. And so he does two really remarkable things. The first is he creates a siddur. This would be a long time ago, but I gave a whole sermon talking about the history of prayer books in this country that he called Minhag America. If I remember correctly, his is Minhag America. And he gets into a battle with another guy who creates his own siddur. It's a conversation for another time. But in the end, again, you could just hear minhag means a custom. It describes the way of a particular kind of place. In the same way that since Jews have lived all over the world, the Jews of Morocco and the Jews of Greece and the Jews of France and the Jews of Germany didn't necessarily daven exactly the same kind of way. Their prayer books weren't exactly the same. And so he wanted to create something, the first really, truly American prayer book. There is another competing one, as I said. Don't worry about the history of that. That'll be for another night. Okay, but in the end, the second thing that he addresses is this question about how are we going to create a native-born American rabbi, right? One who can speak not just in the language of this new country, but to speak in the language of this new country. What I mean by that is to understand it, to understand its identity, to understand its people, to understand its promise, and to be able to create something that feels not like Germany moved across the ocean, but feels like America. And so, along with a number of other significant figures we won't really touch on tonight, he first helps to found what is then known as the UAHC, which was the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, which should already tell you something about the different terminology that was used in those days, which eventually becomes what we now are familiar with, which is the URJ, the Union of Reform Judaism. So here we're talking about 1873 has the idea to pull this together, right? A union of the then synagogues of the country identified with the Reform movement, whose origins, again, were back in Germany. And then he takes the next step, which is to create a seminary, right? To train Native American Reform rabbis in a way that will serve our people. And so he founds this campus in Cincinnati in 1875. Okay, 1875, making it the oldest rabbinical seminary still in operation in this country. Okay, JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, the conservative movement, and Yeshiva University of the modern Orthodox movement are not later until the 1885. And to be honest with you, most likely came into existence in that time period because they saw ultimately what Wise was doing, and they decided they were going to follow in suit. So almost instantaneously, Isaac Mayer Wise changes the entire trajectory of American Judaism through these two acts of helping to create and push for the creation of an American Siddur and for creating a seminary to train, at that point, only American rabbis. Now, I'll just say as a personal aside, in the I guess, entranceway, the vestibule of HUC's campus in New York City, there is a bust of Isaac Mayer Wise. Don't tell anybody that I did this, but oftentimes before finals, I would rub his head for good luck. And it brought me very good luck. I managed to pass all of my classes. I even won some awards. So I owe it all to my friend here, Isaac Mayer Wise. So as I said, maybe not the first place you would think to start a seminary, but he begins it in Cincinnati, which for those that don't know, Cincinnati had a different name at one point in history. It was known as Porkopolis, which seems like an odd place to build a rabbinical seminary, but sure enough, he did. And it was because the movement of people at that point in American history was moving west. The Midwest at that point was the epicenter of some of the greatest building and expansion in our country's history. And Cincinnati was in its a unique position as a hub of commerce and of transportation and a number of things. It became, before St. Louis became sort of the gateway to the West, it really functioned in that way as Americans started moving further and further away. And here is a rendering of what those early days looked like. Okay, and the Cincinnati campus has for many, many years been an epicenter of Reformed Jewish life here in the United States. And I thought this was actually rather cute. This is a picture, as you can see, of the first graduating class of the Hebrew Union College in 1883. So aside from appreciating some really wonderful mustaches, and at least a monocle or two that are thrown in there, as you can see, was not the biggest class of people, only 4 to begin with. And we'll just keep this picture in mind for a little bit later in our discussion. Now, to take something of a tangent, but to address something head on, I just out of curiosity, have any of you ever heard of the infamous Treifa banquets? Okay, so I told you you'd all learn something tonight. I feel very confident. So the word treif is if I'm not mistaken, really is a Yiddish term, less a Hebrew term, but it's a catch-all term for anything that is an impermissible food item when considering the laws of kashrut. So your classic examples, right? Pork, shellfish, things of that nature. These are things that are treif. So while some of this is history that is debated, the picture that you see is actually a picture, believe it or not, of one of the copies of this menu. This was a celebration of this first ordained class, in which the choice of food included not pork, but a number of pieces of shellfish, as you'll sort of see. It's hard to see here, little neck clams, for example. So this moment in time is very important, not just as a sort of chuckle, but to undo what is an often misunderstood part of American Jewish history. So the conservative movement in the United States of America did not precede the Reform movement. Many, many people think that. It's the exact opposite. What happens is that this is sort of the spark that lights an already existing powder keg between the Jews who, again, are largely still coming over from their lives in Eastern Europe and their lives in Central Europe, and of the growing nature of the period of Enlightenment and some changes that are being seen in Reform Judaism and the practice of Reform Judaism back in Germany, and a reality that many people are not necessarily following the lives of kashrut as their runners ultimately did. And so what happens is a schism starts. And while Isaac Mayer Wise was not the one who approved this menu, it actually surprised him, he didn't come out forcefully against it. And so he was taken to task by some of his then colleagues who decided that they were going to split up and start their own thing that was something in between Reform and the orthodoxy of which they were familiar from Eastern Europe. And again, this history is actually very sort of highly debated, but it's important to understand these moments in time. And in particular, as I said, to break down some of the misunderstandings of what Reform Judaism is and what conservative Judaism is for that matter. Neither of these streams of Judaism are the same today as they were then, but it's easy to understand how Jews coming from the same place would have a desire for creating a different kind of Judaism in America. Some of them wanted to really create their own thing. Some wanted to still hold on to some of the practices of their forefathers, even if it meant only in their home, right? Many choosing to eat different things, eat things that are potentially not kosher outside of them. So we won't go into this too far, but it's important to understand this moment in history as it creates, again, very divergent paths. Next, as I said at the beginning, right, is not just HUC. I tend to forget to add the JIR part of it, but the JIR is a very important part of HUC's history as well. The Jewish Institute of Religion, started by Rabbi Stephen S. Wise. Just curiosity hands, how many of you are familiar with that name in any way? Okay, Judy was very quick. Good. Right, some of you may know Stephen S. Wise Free Synagogue in New York City or Stephen Wise Temple in Los Angeles. These are named after Rabbi Wise, who was not in any way related to Isaac Mayer Wise, just to make it clear. It's one of those remarkable things of history, right? A significant part of our Reform identity created by two wise men. What are you going to do? Okay, but Rabbi Wise had a very important piece of contribution to American Judaism in particular, and that he was the strongest proponent for what he referred to as freedom of the pulpit. As he said, to question whether the pulpit shall be free or whether the pulpit shall not be free, and by reason of its loss of freedom, reft of its power for good. And he believed very strongly that rabbis from the pulpit have an obligation to speak on matters that are relevant to the times. Okay, so when you hear people who say, right, to critique the rabbi, say, I didn't come here to hear about politics. I didn't come here to hear about what's going on in the world. I came to hear about the Torah. Wise understood that those two things are not separate from each other. And if rabbis in the end can't feel like they can express, not about their opinions, but what Judaism has to say to contemporary matters, if they don't have that freedom, then there is a really serious danger, not just to the Jewish community, but to actually the freedom of this entire country itself. And he was a strong proponent of it. And he created the JIR as a non-denominational seminary so that either Reform Jews or conservative Jews or Orthodox Jews could come and could study in the same seminary and receive what is called smicha, rabbinic ordination. And as you'll see as my fun fact number 2, some of you may remember I've mentioned this before, and I'll show you evidence of this in a little bit. My Zaidi, my grandfather, Rabbi Samuel Geffen, received his second smicha, his second ordination from the Jewish Institute of Religion from Rabbi Wise himself, first being from my great-grandfather in a more personal kind of way. So unfortunately, over time, as often is the case in non-denominational settings, it was financially very challenging for the JIR to continue to exist. And so as a result, really, of the very hard work of the famed archaeologist Nelson Gluck. Anybody know Nelson Gluck? Does that name sound familiar? Okay, great. We'll do a night on Nelson at some point or another. But thanks to his negotiations, it was not easy. HUC and JIR ultimately merged, and in so doing, created the first campus of HUC JIR in New York City, taking over the space of where the JIR was currently located next to the Stephen Wise Temple, or a part of, eventually moving down to West 4th Street and Broadway, where I ultimately studied and where the campus still sits today. Eventually, over time, it expands even further, realizing that Jews are not just living in New York, they're not just living in the Midwest. As we said, history dictates a lot of this story. And especially in the post-war era, where many people were moving, especially to Los Angeles, in which houses are being built for GIs, in which Jews are leaving the Lower East Side of New York and leaving Brooklyn and traveling to this beautiful sunny place, the realization that it is not sufficient, especially again in a day and an age where flying from one part of the country to the other was not the easiest or inexpensive thing, in some cases was impossible, to have a presence in Los Angeles to be able to serve the needs of the growing West Coast Jewish population. HUC in LA is where Lou received both of her master's degrees, and in which I received my second master's in Jewish education, and in which has been a part of the LA landscape, and next to, adjacent to the USC campus, in which they have a lot of interaction with each other. And it is a great place to learn with its own great faculty and its own great identity. It's important to note that it does not have the cantorial school there. It trains only rabbis, and School of Nonprofit Management, which was where Lou primarily studied, and the School of Education, where Cantor Lauren will be leaving for. It's why we're losing her. She is moving to LA, at least for the year, to complete her studies there. And just as importantly, in 1963, to take up space in Yerushalayim, to build a seminary in the holy city of Jerusalem, which may seem like an obvious choice, but if one studies the history of Reform Judaism, especially in its early days in Germany, the early movement basically said, we do not really prayed for or worked towards a restoration of the Jewish people to Israel. Not that they were against it per se, but it simply was not their focal point. And they really looked at, in particular, Germany and America and these enlightened places as the places to build up a growing reform movement. So in 1963, we have to remember those days in Israel were still fraught. And to remember in particular, it is prior to 1967. The location of the HUC campus is directly across from the old city. In those days, the Jordanians still controlled the old city. The line of demarcation was basically right outside the door, to the point in which gun rounds, shots, would be fired periodically from the Jordanian side over at the side. So HUC was, for a good number of years, under periodic fire as they built this campus. Okay, and its original purpose was actually in the fields really of postdoc work in archaeology, as I mentioned Nelson Gluck before. And to this day, some of the most significant archaeological digs in Israel are still run under the auspices of HUC-JIR. And they have a wonderful museum there with a number of significant finds. Perhaps another night we'll talk about it. And then in 1998, there was a renovation that was run by the famous Israeli architect, Moshe Safdie, who, if you've never heard Moshe Safdie before, Google him after our service is over. It is one of the most beautiful places on earth. As you can see here, this is the inner courtyard. Me and Lou literally fell in love in this year in Israel when we were here, somewhere in this courtyard. Our Hebrew class was somewhere over in this vicinity. And for those that were with us a few years ago when we went to Israel, Jim and Judy were with us. This is exactly where we were when we learned with some of my favorite professors who lived there. So we can't lose how significant it is that HUC's presence, again, is not just in Israel, not just in Jerusalem, but in the very, very heart of what Jerusalem is. So for anybody who tells you that Reform Judaism doesn't have its place in Israel, you can tell them that that's not true, and it has not been true for a very, very, very long time. So I want to just give a couple examples of a few places in which HUC-JR has really taken the lead, especially here in America, but really also in Israel, as we will soon learn. As we said, first seminary that's still in existence, permanent seminary that was built in this country. The first to found a cantorial school in North America, not just in the United States, but in North America as a whole. First to ordain the first woman rabbi, Rabbi Sally Priesand. First woman cantor Barbara Ostfeld. Established the first clinical pastoral education program in a Jewish seminary in 1990. Ordained the first woman rabbi in the state of Israel, Rabbi Nama Kelman, who is still the dean of the Israel HUC-JR campus and a dear friend, an amazing teacher of Torah. Ordaining in 2006, the first transgender rabbi, 2009, the first African-American rabbi, and 2017, the 100th Israeli Reform rabbi, of which there are now numerous Reform congregations all over the country, and particularly germane to us, the first person ordained simultaneously as cantor and rabbi in a progressive community of modern Israel, the first HUC cantorial ordination in Yerushalayim, none other than Shani Ben Or, our guest who is coming in 2 weeks. So here we see again that the ethos of our seminary is one that is always looking to push our conversation forward, to open the tent wider, to think of the various ways in which Judaism manifests itself in America and around the world, and even in Israel. It's something we should all be very proud of, to be connected to such an institution. And, as I said, to serve the Jewish people and beyond. Remember the picture that I had of that first class of 4 kids. So this is just the New York campus, not including Cincinnati, not including Los Angeles, not including Yerushalayim, just the New York campus of what it looks like today, of the rabbis who are being trained and the cantors who are being trained at HUC in New York, all proudly sitting outside of Temple Emmanuel waiting to be ordained as the newest batch of rabbis last year in 2021. And as you see here, it is not just rabbis, not just cantors, not just educators. Last year alone, the Hebrew Union College awarded 157 degrees and certificates. That is 157 dedicated servants of the Jewish people, servants of the American Jewish community, the world Jewish community, of varying backgrounds, various ages, genders, ethnicities, and all of whom, again, who are dedicated to what it means to be part of the Reform movement and to be part of really the Jewish people as a whole. So to go from 1870, whatever it was, to today, and to see the growth and to see the impact, just imagine in your mind, if every year this number of people are going out there in the world to change it, it doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of this really remarkable institution. So all of this leads to why I'm excited for not a week from next Shabbat, in which we are welcoming, as I said, President Rayfeld, who will join us. He was with us a number of years ago when we were still back in person. And of course, our cantor, Rabbi Shani Ben Or, who is a remarkable, multi-talented person who was with us a number of years ago as well. And between the two of them, to have a conversation on really 21st century Jewish leadership, defining a dynamic future. Where do we go from here? And Shani is a perfect example of what is taking place, for example, in Israel, right? It was unfathomable a few decades ago that there would be Reform congregations in Israel. It was generally thought of either you were basically traditional Orthodox, maybe a handful of conservative services, maybe somewhere, or you were secular entirely. Now, if you were to go to Beit Daniel, for example, in Tel Aviv, you would see hundreds of people outside on the Namal on the port, dancing, singing, praying in their own Israeli way, right? Not American Reform Judaism in Israel, but a native Israeli Reform voice. And Shani is at the very forefront of that. And President Rayfeld has been running, again, HUCJR for now several years through obviously some of the most challenging times imaginable. And they have had to make some very tough decisions and to make some adjustments to address this future. And I'm really very excited. Part of what we're going to do when we're together is I'll have a chance to interview them and to get a sense of where do they see things going, where our movement is going, where our communities are going. This is a really rare opportunity. And so I really want to impart to everybody, whether it's in person, whether it's online, be a part of this Shabbaton. You will not be disappointed, I assure you. Now, two last personal words. As I mentioned before, the significance of the JIR in particular, some of you may remember this from my office, but this is a picture here. This is my grandfather, Rabbi Samuel Geffen, my great-grandfather, Rabbi Tuvia Geffen, who is most famously known for giving the first lecture to Coca-Cola, my great-uncle Joel, Rabbi great-uncle Joel, and Stephen S. Wise. And what's fascinating about this picture, according to my dad, is that Stephen Wise almost never wore a yarmulke, if he ever did it at all. And the only reason he's wearing it at all is a deference to my great-grandfather. He didn't want to upset him in any form. But this is a part of my lineage. It's a part of my personal history. I would not be here without HUC. I would not be here without the JIR. These are things that are deeply meaningful to me. And the last thing I'll show you, also from my previous office, to go back up, is what is called by smicha. This is the thing, although nobody ever asked to see it, including when you hired me, which I find absurd. This is what makes me legitimate. This is the thing that says it. And listed below are the signatures of my professors, the people who taught me, including really one of my most beloved teachers, Rabbi Aaron Pagan, Zichron Holy Bracha, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. These things are sacred treasures to me. And to Rabbi Morris, who would, I'm sure, tell you the same thing from his experience as well. And eventually, she's got a few years, Cantor Lauren, and we think back to Cantor Jordan, Rabbi Jordan, to Cantor Tamara, to Cantor Amanda, all the way back to Cantor Bookdahl, to Cantor Jill, who was with us last night, Jill Abrahamson. Right? Again, we don't come from nowhere. And without HUC and without supporting HUC and understanding it and appreciating it for what it is, I don't know, we certainly would not know each other. And to me, this is what it's really all about. So it's important to me, and I hope, again, as I said, that you did learn at least one new thing here, but to really understand it, should anybody challenge you and say something about Reform Judaism from a place of ignorance, I want you to be in possession of knowledge to counter that. Okay, somebody tries to convince you that this is a late coming thing, that it's something else entirely. No. Okay, American Judaism today would not exist in the way that it does. It would not have the identity that it does without people like Isaac Mayer Wise, without Stephen S. Wise, without hundreds of other people whose names we probably don't even know, who believed in the idea that Reform Judaism not only could be a part of American history, but could help to define it. And not just our history, but our future as well. So I thank you for indulging me. I hope very much you'll be a part of our Shabbaton in a couple of weeks. And I hope that we will prove to our guests just how much we know and appreciate about this wonderful institution. So with that, I wish us all a Shabbat Shalom. I'll invite us to turn back to our prayer books to page 586 at the bottom of the page. Aleinu l'shabech. Aleinu l'shabech Madon hakol, latet gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kingoyeh haratzot, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. Page 591. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. We'll turn now to page 598 for the Mourner's Kaddish. And for those that choose, if you are remembering a loved one, you're certainly welcome to rise at home or to remain seated, whatever is most comfortable for you. Tonight, we are thinking of those who have passed in our community in recent months. Dr. John Abderkin, Martin Blake, Faith Diskin, Linda Donath, Arlene Eber, Jay Fagan, Ellen Frank, Chaim Bear Greenwald, Gerald Hirsch, Mark Joseph, Jane Beard Katz, Gertrude Katz, Elaine Krotman, Emmanuel Kiprios, Leo Leibowitz, William Littman, Sandra Tromberg Luongo, Nancy Nagel, Harry Olstein, David Senth, Anita Sheldon, Alan Silver, Larry Warter, Peter Weinstein, and Matthew Adam Zimmerman. We also marked the yard sites that occurred during the last week for Felicia Abraham, Nathan Bitterman, Albert Bookstaver, Cecile Busgang, Rose Schwatzky, David Davis, Rose Doctorow, Louis Dornfield, Lydia Gossi, Lynn Friedman, Joseph Goldberg, Max Goldman, Bernard Emmanuel Jacoby, Ann Giroux, Honey Linden, Louis Morse, Aileen Phillips, Arlene Rosenberg, Frida Rudinsky, Phyllis Samuels, Ethan Francis Schwartz, Nancy Dinah Spitzer, Andrew Weiner, and Harry Zucker. In addition to the names that we shared, if anyone is on the Zoom that would like to add additional names, you're welcome to do so. Anybody who is watching from home, say the names of your loved ones out loud, and to invite the mourners to join me on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba, ve'alma divrach yirutei ve'amlich malchutei, v'chayichonu v'yomechonu v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, v'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru, amen. Yehei shemei Rabba mevarach ve'alam u'li'almei almayim. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha b'richu le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalom rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam libracha, may every one of their memories be forever blessed. Okay, Shabbat Shalom again, everyone. So in few important announcements. First is Shabbat services tomorrow morning, beginning at 9:30. Thank you again for everybody's understanding that we couldn't be in person this evening. We really wanted to support our wonderful hosts here at the Whalers Church who are having a fundraiser this evening at the same time. But tomorrow, we're back in the chapel, so anybody who wants to come in person, you're welcome to come 9:30. Otherwise, as always, on Zoom, Facebook, or on YouTube, or our website as well. And of course, to join us on Zoom for Torah study at 12 o'clock. A reminder that Ruth Joseph's book group will be meeting at 11 o'clock on Zoom this Sunday as well. You can email Ruth if you would like to get in touch about joining up. Also, a reminder on Monday that the Advanced Conversational Hebrew class with Shelley begins at 11:15. And a mitzvah is meeting at 11:30. My class on Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and the Prophets is on Zoom at 12. And then the Social Justice Committee will be having its regular meeting at 5 on Zoom as well. A reminder that this Thursday at 5 o'clock, we're having an in-person screening of the award-winning film, Fiddler's Journey to the Big Screen, about the making of Fiddler on the Roof. It will be held in the Old Whalers Sanctuary, so our regular COVID requirements are in place, vaccines and masks. There is no charge, but there is no virtual option for this because of the way that streaming movies works, unfortunately. So come in person if you can, but we're looking forward to that. Again, that's this Thursday at 5 o'clock. Reminder that next Friday is, next Shabbat, I should say, is our goodbye, at least in some form or the other, to Cantor Lauren. So we hope that you can be a part of that again, either in person or online. Anybody wants to send some parting words to her, I'm sure she will appreciate it. But certainly we are sad to lose her. We're excited for Cantor Kevin to come in towards the end of the summer, but we know Lauren has become a big part of our community, especially in the last month where she took over for me while I was sick and did an amazing job. So this is what, a big part for us is how we treat our student cantors. I'm very proud of the fact that I belong to a congregation and lead a congregation that truly values the input and the impact of our student cantors. Again, trained at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. So we hope that you'll be able to join us and come out for that as well. Later that evening, we will acknowledge the beginning of Tisha B'Av, the holiday in which we commemorate the destruction of the temples, which we will do in partnership as we've done for the last many, many years with Rabbi Jan Urbach and the Conservative Synagogue of the Hamptons. Services are late because we have to wait for Shabbat to end, so they will not begin until 9 o'clock. They'll be available for those who want to come in person and those on Zoom. But to just, again, check, as always, with everything, make sure you check in with e-blast and stuff like that for the most up-to-date information. I also want to highlight that on Monday, August 8th, we have a really great evening of learning with Rabbi Dr. Shmuley Yankovich, who has written a number of books, prolific writer, a remarkable guy who just met with him actually this week to plan. This is a program that is being sponsored and led by the Social Justice Committee, and he is going to present on a remarkable book that he's written, which is a social justice commentary on the book of Mishlei. Mishlei is Proverbs. So Proverbs is one of those amazing parts of our Tanakh that we almost never study because it is not part of the Haftarah. It's not generally part of holidays unless small quotations here or there, but it is full of Jewish wisdom. And Shmuley has connected that Jewish wisdom to the work of social justice, of social action, of trying to create a better world tomorrow that exists today. He is a remarkable teacher, a remarkable scholar, great speaker, and is going to join us on Zoom again Monday, August 8th. I believe that is a 6 p.m. Program. So again, we're looking forward to that very much. Reminder, Wednesday, August 10th, there is a tour of the Marcos Studio and Archive in Amagansett. That's a program that is being run by Toby Spitz. So if you have any questions, so please contact Toby. And as I said earlier, to remember that our Shabbaton, August 12th, 13th, we will welcome President Rayfeld of HUCJIR and Rabbi Cantor Shani Ben-Or from Jerusalem, who will join us for a whole weekend's worth of learning and opportunities to grow and to appreciate this unique thing that we call Reform Judaism. There's even more stuff to come, believe it or not, at the end of August, but we'll be here till 8 o'clock if I say it all. So check your calendar, check your e-blast, call Eileen if you got questions, but be a part of it all. This is a really, really great month packed with great stuff ultimately to do. So with that, I wish you all again a Shabbat Shalom. And I think for our close tonight, let's sing Shalom Aleichem. We haven't done that in some time. So you can turn back together to page 627 in our prayer book, Shalom Aleichem. And if you're sitting next to somebody you love, you're more than welcome to put an arm around. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon. Mihi melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moachem leshalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mihi melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruchuni leshalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mihi melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedchem leshalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mihi melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we'll turn back to page 123, I believe, for Kiddush. If you happen to have a Kiddush cup handy, you're welcome to join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu. V'shavat kodsho b'ahava u'b'ratzon enchilanu, zikaron lema'aseh v'reshit. Vihu Yom Tefillah L'Mikrae Kodesh, Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, Tivanu Bacharta, Ve'otanu Kidashta, Mikol Hamim, Ve'Shabbat Kodesh, Ve'ahava U'Ratzon Hinchaltanu, Baruch Atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen. Chaim. I'm having trouble finding my big Kiddush cup, so we've shrunk down, but maybe that's better. I got to drive home. Good Shabbos, everybody. I hope all of you have a wonderful Shabbat. Anybody who's on the Zoom, you're welcome to stick around. We can have a little kibitzing good time. Those that are watching on the stream, we wish you a Shabbat Shalom, and we will see you hopefully tomorrow, if not next week. So again, Shabbat Shalom, and let me turn off the, here, you guys can all unmute now if you'd like.